You are watching or listening to Film Club and pa-ra-pa-pum-pum. This is our Christmas party. So we are, of course, talking about that big summer blockbuster, Die Hard, so you don't have to. Hi, I'm JR.
I am Matt.
And I'm Simon.
Hi, I'm Mark.
And I am Ross.
Yes, it's the Film Club Christmas party. So we brought our Film Club ringers in to help us out. So Ross, our American correspondent, we are long overdue for our Good, the Bad and the Ugly trilogy, but we'll get to that sometime in the new year. Things went a bit crazy when Doctor Who came back on the air. And Mark, who joined us recently to help us out with our Matrix sort of mini season of bits and pieces, of which more later. But in the meantime, we're here to talk Die Hard. So first of all, I'm going to ask the most important question of all. And here's my tuppence worth. I don't think it is. And I'll tell you exactly why. Because Christmas is the midwinter point at which the darkness stops increasing and the lightness begins to increase instead. And the story of Jesus is supposed to be a transformative story about humankind. So we're talking about not just transformation of the species, but also transformation of the environment. And Christmas stories are supposed to reflect that. In Die Hard, for all its Christmas trappings, John McClane is exactly the same character at the end of the film as he was at the beginning. Therefore, I put it to you that Die Hard is an action movie with Christmas trappings rather than a Christmas movie. But we are going to take a vote. And since there's an odd number of us, we will come up with an actual answer to this question on this podcast. And I will abide by the answer as long as it's the one I want it to be. So I vote Die Hard is not a Christmas movie. Ross, what's your vote? Die Hard a Christmas movie or not?
It is, because it in a lot of ways represents every large family Christmas, including my family's. Violence, destruction, awful zingers thrown at people for no good reason. I mean, it's kind of like the Home Alone movies. That's what I get out of it.
Fair enough. Mark, how about you? Do you think it's a Christmas movie?
Yeah, I mean, I get your argument, yeah, and I have heard that made before, and I think it's a very valid one. But I do think it's fundamentally the story of a man who wants to spend some time with his wife and kids on Christmas Day, but he's got to get through an awful office party and a bunch of terrorists to do so. We can all relate to most of that, I'm sure.
Fair enough. Matt, you've got to help me out here.
I think it's well, my view could take about half an hour to get through. So I'll say I think it is a Christmas movie because I think on your metrics, I think John McClane does transform himself. The argument I have against it is it was released in July. But
so was
then
Holiday Inn.
That would preclude, and I looked it up, White Christmas, Holiday Inn, Home Alone, Scrooged, and The Shop Around the Corner as being Christmas movies.
Oh, wow, right, okay.
So I dismissed that argument. But in the end, it's whatever you like. It's a subjective thing. If it's a Christmas movie for you, it is.
Simon, I don't
that's my maced answer.
Currently standing at 3-1 with only one person left to ask. I've lost this one. But Simon.
Well, not if you include my wife and my daughter, who watched it with me last night, and they both said, no, it's not a Christmas movie. And I say, no, it's not a Christmas movie at its heart anyway, because I feel that the Christmas element is not only cosmetic, but it's essentially a MacGuffin to kind of move the story on.
Yeah.
And I don't think it does any more than that. And any Christmas smatterings on there are purely, you're hit over the head like with a crowbar with things like the score. Dreadful score. And sorry, but it is. That doesn't mean I don't like the rest of the movie. We'll get to that.
Sounds like someone needs a transformation over this podcast.
Is it transformational? Well, he cries by the end. I suppose there's that.
Do you know, I can't remember. Maybe you can enlighten me. I only watched it like 6 days ago, and I'm struggling now to try and recall. Is there a scene at the end of it where he's actually reunited with his children? I don't think there is.
No. He's never on camera with his kids.
No, that's absolutely insane, isn't it?
Well, he never leaves. He never gets further than the
No.
building.
And they should come, ideally, if they'd written this to be a Christmas movie, they would have found a way to bring the children to the airport so that at the end, when they all come out of the building, they'd all be reunited on the tarmac, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, let's get into Die Hard, whether it's any good. Mark, do you remember when you first saw Die Hard?
God, no, but I do remember when I first saw it in terms of being a Christmas film. So I think I definitely watched Die Hard as a teenager in the middle of summer or wherever, and enjoyed it as an action movie. And then I remember, I think it was like, so my birthday's on Christmas Eve, and
wow.
we were out drinking.
Merry
on the
birthday for,
Thank you,
next
thank
week.
you. And we were out drinking for my birthday the day before Christmas Eve because people have family plans. And in one of the pubs we were in, they were just showing Die Hard, and we ended up staying and watching like the last hour of Die Hard.
Wow.
And it was just within, with this sort of, and I guess Simon's probably right, with all this sort of tinsel and trappings around the pub, the kind of warm sort of Christmassy atmosphere outside the pub, and then Die Hard on the telly. I was like, oh yeah, this works. This really works as a Christmas film.
So that's
and
like
since
a
then I've watched it
sports pub for film nerds, right?
Basically, I've basically watched it every Christmas since then. So that was about 15 years ago.
So it's a bit like Wizard of Oz for you.
Sure.
For our generation, Wizard of Oz was the film that was every year without fail. So you've watched it like every year since. Wow.
Pretty much, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. Ross, how about you? Do you remember?
I saw it in the theater.
Yeah, yeah.
I went to the theater, saw it. I knew who the director was. He'd done one or two other 80s. This is the beginning of the 80s action movie.
Yeah.
It's like the first. This is the big one, and then it was on mid to late 80s. It was on cable. You could flip from Cinemax 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It was always on. Literally, you could watch it 24 hours a day just by flipping channels. It was on. And, we just in the 80s, that's what it was. You would see the movies, up 2 months after they finished, like on HBO or Cinemax or Showtime. And sometimes they all had the same movie. And this one was one of them. It was just on in a loop.
Did you
for
like
like a
it
decade?
Then?
Yeah, I liked it. Every time I watch it, I like it more out of nostalgia than I do out of quality. He's
Fair
good. The actors are good. The characters are good. The plots. I read, I'm a comic collector. I read comic books. It's, it's on that level.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So, but he's charismatic. I went to see it because I want to see him crash and burn.
For me, I knew him from Moonlighting.
Yeah.
And Moonlighting had been a massive success over here. And we've got so many fewer TV channels. Moonlighting was something I watched religiously, not particularly because I especially was into it. I enjoyed it enough to come back to it week after week. But there was so little that was on. Moonlighting was on when, really dull things were on the other side. But there was a great chemistry between Sybil Shepherd and Sybil Shepherd. Yeah, that's right.
Sybil Shepherd. Yeah.
Sybil Shepherd and Bruce Willis. And yeah, to see him in a movie without Sybil Shepherd seemed like a really weird thing at the time. I think I caught this when it came onto VHS rather than at the cinema. And yeah, I thought for my money, the first time I saw it, I thought he felt slightly adrift without Sybil Shepherd there because he felt like he should be sparring with a female partner, but he spends most of the film on his own. And all the sparring he does tends to be over communications devices or, shouting across rooms and stuff like this. So in that sense, it's really prescient of what will happen later on in the movies. It's very prescient about stuff like that. But at the time, it felt to me like a really odd thing for him to do. Simon, you're slightly older, so I'll come to Matt after. Do you remember when you first saw it?
Yeah, I don't think I saw it at the cinema. So it would have been on VHS around that time. And then that rewatch yesterday was probably the first time I've watched it since.
Oh wow, yeah, sure.
But I did really enjoy it, and I think probably the things I enjoyed at the time I didn't enjoy so much this time. It was kind of it's flipped in a lot of ways, that there were things I didn't enjoy about it then that I enjoyed now, and vice versa. So, yeah,
A bit of a mixed bag, then, sort of.
yeah. I think in general it's good though.
Yeah,
I think it's really well constructed, and
Yeah.
and goes along.
Well, John McTiernan either just had or was just about to, and I can't remember which way round they are, done Predator, if I'm not mistaken.
He did, I don't know the order. I watched HBO has this show where they show it. It's enough the films that you grew up with, and they do this one, and it's kind of like the little movie that could. McTiernan, I think he had done Predator, and that was it.
He did Predator the year before.
Yeah. And then he shaped it with the writer and a bunch of other people, and and Willis wasn't the first choice.
No, Frank Sinatra.
Wow.
Well,
he played him in an original.
Yeah.
There is a John McClane movie in the 60s, which is truly offensive. It is unwatchable now because the murderer is William Wyndham. I know him from Star Trek. He was Commodore Decker, but he plays a homosexual who's murdered, and it is probably one of the most offensive performances I've ever seen, ever.
Wow.
I mean, it is really just an awful movie.
That
is it ironic that I'm holding up a little Brit mug?
We have to come to Matt, though. Matt, I've not asked
I'm
you
sorry.
yet, but do you remember what your first experience of Die Hard was?
Well, I was thinking, I definitely didn't see it at the cinema. I don't think I saw it on VHS. So my first memory of it had an ITV news break just as he went into the lift shaft, where he falls down the lift shaft and went into the ventilation corridor thing. So it must have been on ITV. I watched it, but I really liked it, and I must have recorded it off the television onto VHS, because I remember watching it again and again. This week, I think I watched it last year, but before last year I didn't have it on video, and I'd lost my hard drive, and so I hadn't watched it for 10 or so years. But it is a film that if you start watching it, for me, if I start watching it, I have to finish it. I can really happily watch it through, because it's a heist movie and it's a breakout movie. It's got all that kind of comforting sort of genre structure to it, that you know exactly what's going to happen. He's charismatic. Alan Rickman is still amazing and hasn't lost it. So it's perfect.
I think what he's doing here, I think what happens at the end of in the sort of late 1980s and early 1990s, is that there's a bunch of directors who basically take the action movie and turn it inside out. And I think Die Hard, I think there's a lot of, not flaws isn't the right word, but I think it's horribly 1980s in a really nasty way that really doesn't agree with me. But at the same time, I have to admire it. I do enjoy it massively, but I have to admire it for the way it's basically a disaster movie that doesn't involve a disaster, but that involves a heist instead. But it follows not necessarily the plot beats, but it follows a lot of the tonal things that you get in disaster movies. So it feels exactly the same as something like the Poseidon Adventure or one of the airport movies.
You want to say Towering Inferno at some point.
Well, Towering Inferno, obviously, yeah. But I mean, it has the feel of those things without following the plot beats of those things. So what John McTiernan's basically doing is mixing and matching the tone of a disaster movie with the themes of a heist movie in the form of an action movie. And I think that's a really potent hybrid, and he's sort of creating a new genre here, and they go on, and he and lots of other people will poke at this genre. I mean, Predator as well is another example of this new genre that's emerging at the end of the 1980s as we go into the 1990s, of action movies that are actually other genres that are mapping onto the action sort of thing. I mean, it's not like nobody had ever done it before, but I think they do something at the end of the 1980s that turns it almost into a genre in its own right.
I think there's also so the 1980s. I think this is the end of the 1980s and the beginning of the 1990s, because there's a trend of the 1980s for sort of hard-bodied action movies. So Schwarzenegger and Stallone, and Bruce Willis is well built, but he's also sort of portrayed as a kind of out of his depth, schlubby man, even though he's kind of ripped. But it's sort of not quite. It's sort of that kind of transition. but that kind of wisecracking thing, this is where Robert Downey Jr. comes in as well after this, and they start to get Shane Black comes in and starts to make these kind of bantery action movies.
And then they try and get Schwarzenegger.
Which I think are better.
Yeah. But they try and get Schwarzenegger to do things like that in things like Last Action Hero and so on.
Yeah.
But anyway, Ross, does it still hold up for you?
Yeah, it's still yeah. I was in my late teens and 20s in the 80s, so yeah, it does, because there's a comfort to it. And I like the action hero genre with the subset you're talking about, because him and Van der Hoeven and a couple others, all the tropes that we kind of say are cliche in action movies, they invented or created the modern version of it.
Yeah.
So the 80s ones I like a lot more than I like some of more modern ones. So because this one's just down and dirty. It's simple, it gets bigger and bigger and more implausible, but it doesn't have that horrible Michael Bay stink that action movies start to get.
Michael Bay, I think he starts off okay and he gets worse as he goes along, but that's a subject for another time. The thing is, another funny thing about Die Hard is it doesn't end on an over-the-top note. So, I mean, there is a big explosion and there is a daft end for the villain. But after this, action movies, I think, tend to get really operatic in the last half an hour, whereas this feels a lot more natural, despite the fact that it's going over some of those same beats. But Mark, I mean, having watched it nearly every year, I think I know what the answer's going to be. But I mean, you must still enjoy it.
Absolutely. I mean, I watched it this time around, watching it again. Like, there's still stuff in there that, like, I don't remember from the previous time. Just like silly little things like that.
Is this an alcohol thing?
Well, maybe. But that, all that kind of stuff, like, he could be a bartender for all we know. Like, just all these little lines in it that, you kind of, from all the other characters, like, you remember all the Bruce Willis and Alan Rickman's lines and all that kind of thing. But it's a film that's so full of really great small characters that really just breathe life into this situation and make it really believable. And just, I love just the arc of the police officer who accidentally shot a kid, and he redeems himself by shooting a bad guy, and that's fine. He can go off and just go off and start shooting people again. It's okay. He's got his mojo back. I mean, it's just so dumb. And there is something quite 80s about that. But I think what I love about Die Hard is that it's, as you were saying, Matt, it's not those kind of impervious action heroes, which I think we've kind of come back round to again now. Certainly with a lot of those kind of Netflix action movies that are kind of coming out, like your, what's that Chris Hemsworth one? Can't remember now. Extraction. Yeah. Extraction. And it's just like, he's just this impenetrable guy, and he does get, fucked up over the course of the film, but it's also just like, but he survived. How did he survive? Whereas Bruce Willis gets the shit kicked out of him, and you feel it, and he just looks knackered by the end of it. And there's a weight and a reality and stuff that I don't think you get in action movies now, and sort of before that point either.
What you're basically saying is Dwayne Johnson bounces.
Yes.
Simon, I mean, you've kind of answered this, but I'm going around the circle, so I'm not going to miss you out. Do you enjoy it now? Did you enjoy it this time?
Yeah, I did. I really enjoyed it. It went on longer than I thought. Actually, it was an hour left, and my 13-year-old daughter said, "How can there possibly be an hour left of this?"
Yeah.
Because it's the same thing happening over and over again. Which we know it that isn't the case. It is progressing. The thing is that I think Bruce Willis, going back to the Moonlighting, I absolutely adored Moonlighting when it was on television. So I couldn't wait to see him in a movie. And at the time, it was all about Bruce Willis and seeing him in another role. And now this time, I didn't like the character, and I didn't like the bravado, and yeah, it's about the time, isn't it? But equally, I liked, funny how we say about transformation, I liked the journey the character went on as he became more and more beaten up, and started, spurting blood everywhere and cutting his feet up and things like that. And it's almost Harrison Ford levels of showing pain and injury, which I think you warm to the character in that respect, that you want him to get through, because he's like Hugh Jackman in Logan, where he's just absolutely beaten to a pulp, but still keeps going and keeps going. And I think that gives a really, really good momentum to the thing. And you obviously you want him to succeed. So like I say, it kind of reversed that I warmed to Bruce Willis's character in a different way than I did the first time I saw it, and I think it works on a more human level in that respect. As to whether it was all a little bit, I mean, I really didn't like at the start, where he's keeps commenting on women and touching posters of topless women and things like that, and it's like, am I supposed to like this guy?
Yeah, I kind of do that when I come out of elevators, just tap them all. Yes, that for some reason that's really stuck with me.
Okay.
I'm aware that it's inappropriate, but I really love it.
Matt, does it hold up for you? Of course, I got to ask.
Yeah, it does. It does, because as I said, I still, if I start watching it, I don't want to stop watching it. I carry on watching it to the end. I think there is a bravado. He is an annoying character at times, but I think that's kind of undercut by his internal conversations to himself, where he's kind of like criticizing himself and he's self-doubting. So there's a lot of doubt when he's on his own. It's only when he's on the phone to the terrorists that there's a lot of bravado.
And of course, you've got the dichotomy between the John McClane who's lost his family and wants to get them back, and the John McClane who's turned up in this new city where he's never been before, and he's not got any further than the airport, and he's already caught up with catching criminals. So he's got both things going on at the same time. He's not an implacable action hero. He's still the flawed hero of the movie, as well as being the implacable action hero. And it's a nice balance. I'm not sure Bruce Willis is the best person to sort of essay that balance, but nevertheless, it works well enough.
I can't imagine the film being as it is without Bruce Willis. I think if they'd gone with a more conventional, more well-known action star, I think then it might have been more insufferable. I think there's something about him, inappropriate at times or not, that kind of makes the movie. I did also watch Die Hard 2 straight after, which I think is less watchable than Die Hard, but had more good bits in it than I remember. But at this stage, Bruce Willis is clearly an action movie star, so it kind of loses that kind of slightly vulnerable edge.
Yeah, I think it's like he progresses like that, and it's like some movies he's good, and some are question. The final one is like, how is McClane the character McClane changes into this uber action hero.
Well, how far have we got? What number are we on to now? Isn't it 5 or 6?
5. The one with his son in Russia, which is just mind-numbing.
Is that a Christmas movie?
Well, I have a problem with the second one, because I grew up around where it's set, and I went, it doesn't snow like that there, but once every 10 years, okay, and the airport would just shut down. It would just, it would. But before it got that bad, nothing's landing at Dulles. They're just going to ship it.
I was aware that the second one is less realistic than the first one. There's not
hugely realistic.
I did see Die Hard 2 in the cinema, and all I can remember of the film is that shot of him flying up in an ejector seat. That's all I can remember.
Wow.
That's good.
I do think Bruce Willis has improved over the years as he's become more grumpy, because I think sometimes his performances, the kind of morose, man of few words and what have you. I think there's a certain tension on set that translates into the film, because I love him in The Fifth Element and I love him in Pulp Fiction. It's.
Oh, these are still pretty early. I was going to ask, but you've obviously taken the answer out of my hands now. I was going to ask if there's a relationship between the amount of grumpy Bruce Willis manages on screen and the amount of dollars that's dwindling in his pay packet, Because as the pay goes down, obviously the grumpiness goes up, surely.
Well, he's just constantly in stuff.
He
They
is.
do like 20, 30 minutes here or there. So I mean, he's. I don't know why. I don't know if he just has he's got kids to pay for, or
Well, I think
is the divorce from Demi Moore. He still has to pay a certain amount of money for. I don't know, but it's just turns out all this crap.
He's got the Gene Hackman disease that you're a starving actor, you never leaves you.
So
that you always say yet, because I mean, Michael Caine, Hackman, Donald Sutherland. Good God, that dude's ancient. And he still works. He does 4 or 5 movies a year.
But there's also he's got a bit of a Mark Wahlberg's about him. So Mark Wahlberg started basically. He's hooked up with a producer, making streaming B movies effectively, and he's just making 2 a year. And Bruce Willis seems to be doing similar things. He's finding someone who he likes, who he gets along with, and he's just making these films. And the problem, I don't think, is grumpiness, or he isn't charismatic in the films. He's just stopped acting. He's just stopped performing, and he's just there as a name and a kind of a bald face, and that's it. He's got no screen presence anymore. You wouldn't watch a Bruce Willis film now, I don't think, unless you're a drunk and on Netflix.
Yeah, well, which I did recently. I watched that one, which is basically The Ark in Space.
Oh my God!
Okay.
I've seen that.
It's terrible. It's terrible.
I couldn't stop. I could not stop.
Yeah, neither could I. I was like, this is rubbish, but I'm going to just see it through to the end.
If only The Return of Bruno had sold more copies, he might have been happier.
Right, guys, at the risk of overrunning, because we are a little bit limited for time, would everybody like to just pull up a scene or a performance that they particularly liked and sum up and give the film a score out of 10? So, Mark, I'm going to come to you first.
I mean, I'll avoid all the obvious ones because
don't need to. We can talk about the obvious ones.
You know, but there was something I noticed. The most recent time that I watched it, the bit where the SWAT team come in, and they're all like sort of tramping around this sort of forecourt of Nakatomi Plaza, and one of them jumps over a little bush or a hedge or something, and pricks his arm on a rose bush, and like. The extra properly gives over to try and steal the scene, and so that guy, fair play to him. I think he's great.
And out of 10,
10. I mean, I can't not give it 10 out of 10.
Yeah, no, fair enough. Simon, anything that stood out for you and a score out of 10?
It suddenly occurred to me that the scene where he's crawling around in the vents, in the duct, I found myself getting quite tense when that was on, and it suddenly occurred to me, of course, that was emulated in Jurassic Park, wasn't it? Something similar.
Yeah.
In Jurassic Park.
And the Ark in Space.
The girls
Ark in Space just now.
Oh, okay. Is that the reference? So it's Jurassic Park ripped off.
And out of 10,
it's an 8.
Simon?
8 out of 10.
8. Fair enough.
Yeah.
Ross.
I will say, I forget the character's name. But the executive that hits on Holly that is just so skeezy.
Ellis.
That me and my wife were watching it with one of my best friends. We invited him over and said, hey, we're watching the first Christmas movies. It's Die Hard. And he came on screen and we were all like, does he make you more and more uncomfortable every time you see this movie? that you hated him the first time, but then every time you're like going, oh God, him, because he's so repugnant that it just every time I see it, it's worse. It's just awful. And I'll give it a 9 out of 10 because I can watch it whenever.
Brilliant. I am going to go with an 8 out of 10. The thing I'm going to point out is that it's 15 minutes before the bad guys turn up. I mean, I wasn't looking at the clock, but it's about a quarter of an hour. I love the fact that it took its time at the start to introduce you to the concepts before it really started digging in with the story. And yeah, I think I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10 too, because while this will never be one of my favorite movies, it's been a little while since I watched it and I've forgotten just how enjoyable it is. Matt, how about you?
So I think Ellis snorting coke off the office desk was the second most 80s bit in the movie. I think the most 80s bit, and that's my favorite bit this time, was Alan Rickman first coming out of the elevator behind all these guys with guns, holding a Filofax like Donald Trump holding a Bible outside a church and making his demands. That's the most 80s bit in the whole film. I really like, and I can't help but think that that's an Alan. I think Alan Rickman brought quite a lot to this part. Just a lot of intelligence and a lot of humor, but that bit's great. I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10.
I did love the bit
Brilliant.
where the cop was buying loads of Twinkies, though, because that, for me, Ross, growing up on Marvel Comics and seeing those adverts for Hostess Twinkies and never being able to taste one until recent years when they sell them in the supermarkets here now. Just fascinated by Twinkies.
My fascination about Twinkies comes from the Ghostbusters dub for bad language when when Venkman says, "That's right, this man has no Twinkie" instead of Dick. And I never knew what, and actually that was somehow more rude to me because I didn't know what a Twinkie was, and I just assumed they were talking about a dick.
Oh, Twinkie sounds well. Speaking of which, Mark dropped an F-bomb earlier, so if I can get you to say the word Twinkie, Mark, I'll try and edit that back in over the. Or maybe I'll just have to put an explicit tag. Yeah. I think I may just have to put an explicit tag on this one. Mark, Ross, thank you for joining us for our Christmas Film Club episode. It was a pleasure to have you here. A little bit strange to have you here because, Mark, you were supposed to be Simon's replacement, and yet somehow he appears to have turned up in this episode as well, which is not how it was supposed to go at all. But thank you both for coming along. I hope you've enjoyed yourselves.
Oh, always. Can't wait to watch that trilogy in the next year.
Yeah. Right, until we do this all again, which might well be The Matrix, but you never know. I was JR.
I was Matt.
I was Simon.
I was apparently also Simon. I'm Mark.
And I'm Ross.
And we will speak again soon. Merry Christmas, everybody.
Merry Christmas, gentlemen.
Merry Christmas.
Yippee-ki-yay, everybody.
Right, Ross, we have to say goodbye to you, but if everybody else keeps recording, we're going to carry on and do something else. So thank you, Ross, and we'll see you after Christmas, but have a good one and don't work too hard.
Happy
Oh,
Christmas,
I won't.
Ross.
I'm gonna go in there for 2 hours to answer 3 phone calls.
Yeah, that's what John McClane said.
Oh, no.
You'll be 6 hours in and battling terrorists.
Oh no, my overnight person will call out and I'll be stuck there overnight. But I am solo and it's like I got 2 dogs that are high maintenance, and my wife's on her way to Florida.
Yeah, it does sound like a Die Hard in the making.
It does sound like
I'm tired of a Die Hard.
I don't need any more hospital work drama for the rest of my life. So I'm hoping it's mellow. All right, gentlemen, you be good. I'm going to turn this into an MP3 and send it to you.
Yes, please.
All right. I'll do that before I walk out the door.
Right.
All right,
Take care.
thank
Have a
you.
good Christmas.
You too.
Bye.
Cheerio.
Cheers.
Right. The rest of us then, we'll stick around and we'll record an episode on The Matrix. So I'll just wait for Ross to disappear from our screen.
There we
Should
go.
quickly grab a drink. I'll be back in a second.
Oh, sure. Yeah, no problem. Right. But so for the benefit of YouTube, I guess we'd better keep on talking so we don't get any dead air. But yeah, okay, I guess I couldn't explain that we were not planning to do The Matrix in and of itself until maybe sometime in the new year, because our plans had gone awry for doing The Matrix back in November, which was the original idea. And then we found ourselves with a free half an hour this evening, and we'd all seen The Matrix, although not the sequels. But we're going to do a short film club just on The Matrix in advance of Resurrections coming out in a few days' time. And our Matrix Resurrections review we'll do between Christmas and New Year. So yeah, we're going to do a Matrix thing without Lee. We've got a replacement.
Let's see if we can get into a cinema. That's the thing, isn't it?
Yeah, that's true.
Waiting to see what the rules, what happens with the rules. But
Oh well, yeah, it hadn't even occurred to me. Of course, I've been delivering the mail to the View in Exeter all week, and yeah, they're scanning people's things at the door. Yeah, didn't even occur to me. But as things stand, yeah. Go on, Matt.
I'm sure if the guidelines change, then we'll all trust Boris Johnson to do the best for the country, and we'll all follow his carefully crafted instructions and respect him because he deserves respect.
Do you know, speaking of Twinkies, as we were just now, Boris Johnson arrived in Downing Street with one of the biggest Twinkies of all time, didn't he? And yet he's turned it into those little crumbs that you get at the bottom of a pack of chocolate wafers when there's no wafers left, and just a little bit of crumbage that you can lick if you're really that desperate for a last little nugget of morsel of anything before you throw the packet away. That's about where Boris Johnson is now. Anyway, shall we record a thing about the Matrix? Seeing as we are still on video. Right, here we go. You're listening to Film Club, and for the next 20 minutes or so, we are going to be talking about The Matrix, the very first Matrix, this Matrix, so you don't have to. Hi, I'm JR.
I am Matt.
I'm Simon.
I'm Mark.
And so, yes, Mark was brought in to replace Simon. It doesn't seem to have happened, but what's happened instead is that Mark's replaced Lee. Who knew? Who knew that was going to happen? Or maybe Mark and Simon are actually Neo and Mr. Anderson, two sides of the same coin.
I've had people say that I look like Hugo Weaving at various points in my life. It's probably got a lot to do with the pattern baldness.
Really? It might also have to do with
No
that
one's ever
slight-
said I look like Keanu Reeves, sadly, but there we go.
No, and none of the three of us are going to say that either.
I wouldn't have thought you would.
None of us look like Lawrence Fishburne.
It's probably just as well, given we're on video.
I look a bit like Carrie Fisher. Did I get the right Carrie?
No,
I didn't
Carrie
get the
Ann
right
Moss?
Carrie, did I?
Carrie Ann Moss.
Carrie Fisher's dead, so it's probably closer to the truth.
Oh my God, Matt. It's Christmas still, so
Ding
mind
dong
your...
merrily on high.
Mark, you're by far the youngest of the four of us here, although Matt might argue with that. But can you remember when you first saw The Matrix?
Yeah, I think I was slightly too. What year was it? 99.
Yes.
99, yeah.
Yeah, so I would have been 13 when it came out. So yeah, so I wouldn't have seen it in the cinema because my parents were quite draconian in that way. But I certainly saw it on VHS when it came out. Once they'd vetted it the night before, and yeah, it blew me away when I first saw it. Sort of watched the film, and I remember the VHS came with like a documentary about bullet time that kind of immediately played after the credits. And I remember just sitting through the whole thing because I wanted to kind of figure out how the hell they did this sort of amazing new technology, which is obviously a spin on the kind of Hong Kong action movies and stuff like that, but I didn't know that at the time. So I loved it. And I remember going to see like a midnight screening of The Matrix Reloaded. Is that the second one? Yeah,
yes.
Of course it is, yeah. And then being kind of slightly disappointed. And I've still never seen the third one, which I'm going to remedy this week before I go and see the fourth one. But yeah. But yeah, I love the original one. It's great. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to flip that over because I think I saw it when it came out on VHS rather than at the cinema. I absolutely hated it because I've never been a massive fan of action movies. I only generally tend to like action movies if there's something else going on as well. And with The Matrix, it seemed the thing that was going on was this sort of arch quality and this sort of really juvenile sensibility. So it seemed like all the philosophical stuff that it was setting up was the kind of philosophy you might spout around the classroom if you were 13 or 14 years old, but that you'd probably outgrown by the time you were about 16 or 17. And I've got to say, my opinion on that hasn't really changed in the meantime, but I'm not going to go on about it. So I hated it the first time I saw it. I have come to appreciate it in the meantime since. But yeah, my first opinion of this film wasn't very good at all. Matt, how about you?
I saw it at the cinema in 99, and I probably saw it at the wrong time, at the wrong age, the wrong time, because I just spent 3 years studying Baudrillard and simulacra simulation. So I came into this ready-made to be cynical about how they shoehorned a lot of this kind of postmodern philosophy into it. And I was so cross watching it, I kind of missed the actual fact that it looks spectacular and it's kinetic and it's filmed in quite an inventive way and there's quite a good pace to it. watching it again, and then I didn't watch it for ages. So well, actually, no, I did. I spent some time living in a goth household in Stoke-on-Trent, and they were absolutely obsessed with The Matrix. They dressed in the rock boots and the long black coats, and then we watched it then
Wow.
a lot of times. But after that, I sort of stopped. I became allergic to goth for a long time. But rewatching it, I liked it a lot more than I did originally.
Simon.
I'm pretty sure I saw it at the cinema. And if I remember rightly, I do remember rightly. I bought it on Region 1 DVD, so I got it imported. I bought it from. I'm trying to remember the website. There was a specific website. Was it Played?
Yes.
Was it an
I
early
did
version
too,
of Play.com?
Yeah,
Play
there was
USA.
a website. It could have
Oh,
been.
I
Yeah.
remember Play USA. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I worked in an electrical store, and one of the technicians there very kindly chipped my Pioneer DVD player for me to be able to play it. I got it chipped specifically to watch The Matrix Region 1. I bought it on Region 1. I think it was out already in this country, but I chose the Region 1 because it had an extra commentary with Carrie-Anne Moss that I've never listened to. But you just do, you look up the discs and you say, well, which one's got the best stuff on it? But anyway, I really liked it because it was so groundbreaking. I've always been very big on effects. I thought the soundtrack was great. It just seemed very, very cool. I did get irritated by all the people walking around with long black trench coats. And they still do. I still see people in Exeter doing it, but maybe that's a Devon thing. I don't know. So, yeah, I really liked it. As far as the philosophy stuff, I kind of quite liked it, but only from the context of the movie itself, of what was going on. I didn't really think about whether it was trying to give some kind of religious or philosophical message to anyone. Now I realise, yes, it kind of it is, but I think it's, I think it's far more extrapolated throughout the movies than just being there for the sake of it.
I have a theory about it, but after JR.
Okay.
I'm only going to say, I think because, one of the topics that we've brought up a couple of times, especially in the couple of episodes we did with Mark, was the fact that a bunch of movies came out over the course of about 2 years or so, which were doing very similar things to one another. Truman Show and Pleasantville, Dark City and Existenz and The 13th Floor that we've talked about, and a couple of others as well. And the piece I've made with The Matrix is, I do find the sort of philosophy in it a sort of really, I can't really find another word to describe it than a sort of juvenile take on all those sort of French philosophers and whatnot. But the piece I've made with it is, but all those other movies are doing similar things in different ways, that what you're actually getting therefore is a kind of balanced diet across the course of the 6 movies. So I don't mind one that's a little bit more childish. It's kind of, a sort of palate cleanser for some of the slightly more thoughtful ones that we'll talk about another time. So, yeah, I think The Matrix, if you consume it as part of a balanced diet with those other movies, is actually fine. And my initial reaction to it, I've kind of, I've calmed to the movie considerably over the years. And to get into the what do we think of it now, and then I'll come back to Matt, but what do we think of it now? I think it's fine. I never again going to be one of my favorite movies, but it is a movie I can happily put on and sit through, and I don't get tired, and I don't get bored, and I don't get irritated. I just enjoy it for what it is. Matt, we're going to come up with a theory.
No, it's about the postmodernism. So it irritated me originally because it is very superficial. They throw a copy of simulacra simulation in and make it sort of a joke about it, as if to say we're basing it on this, but we're not really. And actually, the more I watched it this time, the more I realized that's the whole point of Baudrillard, is it's all the sort of superficial gloss. So the fact that they're using this postmodern theory as this kind of superficial gloss over this action movie, and it's actually all about spectacle, it's not about philosophy at all, that's just a kind of red herring, that's perfectly suited. That's exactly what Baudrillard would have done. That actually does tie in with the postmodernism, because that's just what it is. So that's how I made my peace with the kind of where I'm disconcerted now is with the way that the Matrix has been picked up by the alt-right conspiracy theories. So now when you see Morpheus offering a red pill and blue pill, all you can think of is QAnon, and actually that this time really hit home with me, really distracted me. This whole sort of, we're not living in the reality, you need to open your eyes to the actual reality, you need to wake up. That's exactly where conspiracy theorists come from, and they've all been influenced directly by the Matrix. So it's JFK's the same. JFK is a dangerous film in that sense, not because of what it says about Kennedy, but because it says don't trust your eyes, don't trust this, don't trust the mainstream elite. Here's the reality.
Of course, the irony is that if you watch the film, then you work out that behind the film there are people writing it and directing it and making this and using this idea to create a bit of entertainment. You know, there is stuff going on behind the scenes.
Yeah,
they're just taking on board the supposed meaning behind the film and riding with that, forgetting the fact that behind it are some writers who are just making a film they want to make.
Yeah.
And they're, you know, tapping into some meaning that they are, you know,
it's
reforming
like
for their own meaning. Yeah.
Well, let's not go too far down that rabbit hole. Get it?
Yeah, very good.
Mark, do you still love it?
Yeah, I think it's still very good. I think Matt's right. There's you kind of watch it now and you can see how some impressionable young minds, or some impressionable minds that should really know better, have kind of taken on sort of the messages of the film, which I don't think are the messages of the film. I think fundamentally it's like anything. It's like Star Wars. It's like it's about fighting oppression.
It's a hero's journey, isn't it?
Exactly. So it's you know, yes, you can read into that nothing is real. You know, don't believe what people tell you, but it is also about just fighting an oppressive regime, and sort of becoming a better person and becoming, you know, reaching your full potential. I do think it slightly fumbles the ending. I think Carrie-Anne Moss and Keanu Reeves are great. But I think in watching it again, that whole bit where it's just like, oh yeah, she told me I was going to fall in love with somebody, and that's kind of what brings him back, lost me a bit, I think, you know, as watching it this time around. But fundamentally, I think it still really holds up. The effects, the action sequences, it's paced really well. I'd forgot, because when I started it, it was like, oh, it's 2 hours and 12 minutes. It's like, God, I don't remember it being that long, and it doesn't feel it either. It kind of whips along at a great pace because it's an action movie fundamentally. So there's great action set pieces that peppered throughout it.
It's an action movie, but it's also a fairy tale, and for the first hour and 45 minutes, it's sort of analogously a fairy tale. And the ending, do you remember the Doctor Who episode Knock Knock, where it's about a haunted house, and then right at the end it becomes this weird love story with a sort of fairy tale quality, and that really knocked a lot of viewers for six, and there was a lot of hate for that episode. What happens at the end of Matrix is similar. For an hour and 45 minutes, it's an action movie that has the sort of philosophy of a fairy tale, and then for the last 20 minutes it's an actual fairy tale that has some of the philosophy of an action movie. And so that flip, I think, maybe is what lost you this time, because I noticed that happening myself, and although I sort of went with it, I could easily see how you could get lost at that point.
I think you believe them like falling for each other, you know, but it's just more, I don't think enough weight is given to it over the course of the film for it to land where it should.
Yeah.
And I think that's where it kind of lost me. But
my issue is with the very last moment, because I think that kiss, I think they recognized that didn't have enough visual impact after Melty Faces like jumping around to close the movie, and then they seemed to tack on this fairly meaningless voiceover scene with Keanu Reeves, and then him shooting off into space, which kind of didn't make a lot of sense to me, other than the writers really wanted to put a bit of a Matrixy ending tacked onto it.
They kind of wanted to give you the impression when they started talking about this character being the one, that he would have superhuman qualities. And for an hour, something like an hour, they try and give you science fiction rationale for the superhuman qualities. But because he never actually sort of manifests superhuman qualities other than speed. So the manifestation of his superhumanity is the speed at which he's able to do things, and sometimes the strength. But when you see him actually flying at the end, that is them showing you that he is superhuman because he can override the Matrix. In other words, he's the one character in the entire film who can look at the Matrix and say, this isn't real, therefore I'm not bound by its rules. But it's because you only see him flying in that very last shot that it does look utterly stupid. But it doesn't kill the movie.
No.
Simon, do you still love it?
Yeah. And I love that last shot. I really love that last
Fair
shot.
enough. Yeah,
because
yeah.
essentially, for me, it's like, oh wow, he's a superhero because he's freed himself of any trappings of normal science, essentially, within that world, and he can do what the hell he likes. Which was why it was a bit strange when you got to the second film and suddenly he seemed far more restricted than you'd think he would be. You'd think he'd be able to actually reshape the Matrix around himself to a greater degree. But it's funny, without going back too much into that whole thing, the meaning behind it. George Lucas was pretty much doing the same thing, but doing it in such a way that people aren't aware that that's what's going on. And maybe that's more of a sign of genius within him, rather than being a little bit pretentious and maybe overthinking it a bit with the Matrix films. But I still really enjoy it. I still think that first film in itself, at the time, I remember when I heard that they were going to do more, it was almost like, oh really? That's that fan thing of worrying that it's going to spoil it. Don't spoil something that's perfect. Just let it alone. Just leave it alone.
And we were in that moment in the movies where if your first movie was successful, instead of doing a sequel or instead of setting up a franchise, all of a sudden you went, oh, there's going to be 3.
Yeah.
Because Star Wars had invented this thing where if your first movie was a success, you had to do 2 more. So
we
got it with
disagree
Back to
about
the
this,
Future.
though, don't we, JR? We disagree about the Star Wars because I'm convinced that the original plan, there were going to be 3. It was always going to be a
3 sets of
trilogy.
3. Yes, but they were all trilogies, and it was a trilogy of trilogies. Do you see what I mean? It's all 3s. So you got to this period where the people who'd grown up, the filmmakers who'd grown up with that original Star Wars trilogy, had to have 3, the same as Star Wars had. And it became a thing. But anyway, Matt, so you've come back, you watched it many, many times when you were a goth, you say, wearing a long black trench coat, right?
No, I didn't say. I didn't say I was.
I'm sure that's what you said.
I said I lived with goths. I wore a fleece and blue jeans and Timberland boots.
You do know.
Was it a
the
BBC
screensaver-
documentary or something? Living with goths.
No. I just, it was Stoke-on-Trent.
The screensaver for this podcast is going to be Matt's head on Neo's body. Oh, and also, speaking of Neo's body, I mean, that's about as deep as this philosophy got. Everybody's saying, is Neo the one? Is Neo the one? It's a 3-letter anagram. It's not difficult. Even a 5-year-old could work out that Neo was indeed the one. Matt, coming back to it all these years after you used to be a goth, did you still enjoy it?
I quite enjoyed it this time. I did. I think it holds up. I think the special effects hold up. What surprised me this time round was I came to it expecting the bullet time effects and the guns and the super speeds and the flying, but I'd forgotten about the kind of the horror in it, the icky Cronenberg sort of bug that turns into an insect that goes through his belly button, and the machine gets it out and squishes it, and the weird morphing effects as the bad guys take over people in the Matrix. I'd forgotten all of those bits, and I actually liked those more than I remembered.
And they essentially visually make it as a film noir as well, don't they? Neo-noir.
Yeah, which was fine. I mean, so that's not my favourite. I think I find that quite cliched. The kind of the Dutch angles and the sort of the rain bits and the bits going down on buildings.
Oh God, you're
That's
going
where
to hate
think,
Dark City.
yeah, I do hate Dark City. That's why
we'll do that one without you.
I think the Wachowskis kind of like Mark was saying, that they're obviously kind of not ripping off, homaging Wuxi films, but the neo-noir stuff is less interesting than the Wuxi stuff. And also, I've watched this at the same time I've been watching Gene Kelly movies as well. There's a lot of dance in this. There's a lot of this is one of those stunt movies where it's clearly drawing on this kind of athleticism of dance. So all of that I like much more than the kind of the camera angles and the lighting throughout. I mean, horrible green lighting all the way through it really gives it a kind of characteristic. But I mean, it's better than blue lighting, which you got everywhere at the time.
I hated the performances at the time, and I've got to say, I'm still not enamored particularly of them now.
Keanu Reeves is rubbish still.
But then he's less rubbish in this than he is in most other things, which is amazing. I think I'd just seen or just was going to go on and see. I think I'd just seen Feeling Minnesota, and that was terrible, and he was terrible in it with Cameron Diaz. And I think that was my most recent experience of Keanu Reeves at the time I saw this. I hate who plays Morpheus? What's the actor's name? He's gone right out of my head. Lawrence Fishburne. I think he's terrible as Morpheus, absolutely terrible. And Hugo Weaving, I think, is terrible too. I understand what they're doing with the performances, but it just really winds me up. I just can't go with it at all. But
JR's departed from my view, and he's right now about to visit Tiny Tim to find out if he's all right.
I think you're right in as much as
watching it now.
I think the best character in it is Cypher. I think he's brilliant.
Is that the one who goes bad?
Yes.
Yeah. Spoilers for anybody who's who's not seen The Matrix, right?
The one who wants to go back into The Matrix, yeah.
The one from Bad Boys.
Yeah, well,
Ralphie.
Mark, what do you think of this?
The Sopranos. I think Joe Pantoliano was fantastic as Cypher. I love that idea of, this sort of choice between freedom, living in this horrendous hellscape where you've got to fight against the machines, or just submitting to ignorance and just having loads of money to just enjoy that ignorance.
Yeah, that really rings true.
I think that's a much more interesting examination of the central kind of red pill, blue pill thing than the actual sort of physical choice that they have to make. That's really the choice at the heart of the Matrix. So I think he's great, and I think it's a really good bit of casting. Because I think he's done quite a few films with the Wachowskis. I think he did their previous one, and I think he's maybe done something since. But so yeah, he's great. I mean, I like Keanu Reeves. I've always liked Keanu Reeves. Sorry, but I can see how people don't get behind that kind of. It's so laid back. It's kind of horizontal acting style, but I think it works for this, and I think it works a lot of other stuff that he does. And yeah, there is that kind of he is this kind of, I don't know, lazy, sort of not so much a slacker character, but he lives by himself. He spends all his time on the computer, and then his kind of mind is opened up to this world. But he still seems quite cynical about it throughout. I think he plays it very subtly, and I think it works really well. So, sorry, I disagree with you on the cast. I think they're all great. Come on.
Oh, so Matt, how did you feel about the cast?
So
William Shatner.
Keanu Reeves I really like now, and I'm aware that he's a really nice guy, and actually I do think he's a good actor because I've seen him in good films, but I'm scarred by Coppola's Dracula, where really that's not subtle and that's not underplaying. That's just, I mean, he's hampered with an accent. This is better than that, so he's definitely better than he was in that. I don't know. I liked all the others. I thought Carrie-Anne Moss was brilliant, as her sort of it's a first film role, and all the crew members, they all had like little personalities, which is partly a script thing, but they were all clearly really happy to be in this kind of quite well written, exciting film, and they all really gave kind of different personalities to each part. And I think Lawrence Fishburne worked. He's really charismatic, I thought, in this.
Matt's turned into the devil.
Okay.
You'll know what I mean if he ever watches this back. I just didn't feel that any of them. I mean, I think Keanu Reeves and Carrie-Anne Moss are the two best things in this by a massive distance. It's basically Hugo Weaving and Lawrence Fishburne that I had the problem with. Those two are playing in an entirely different movie from the rest. But I think that's what the Wachowskis do, frankly. And so I just embrace that when I watch it now. Shall we sum up and give it a score, at the risk of carrying on talking about this one for ages? And shall we maybe invite Mark back to talk about Matrix Resurrections, if he's available when we get to do our podcast on that? But Mark, do you want to sum up and give it a score?
Yeah, I mean, I think it still stands up. I think yes, the passage of time has maybe rendered some elements of the themes slightly, well, not problematic, because art exists in a space that people take from it what they want, and sometimes that's not what you want them to take from it.
It's appropriation rather than
exactly, yeah.
Isn't it?
So I think for me, it's like I say, the ending I think is slightly fumbled, so I'm going to go with a 9. That's
fair enough.
Fair.
Matt, you want to give it a score? And
yeah, I think it does more than hold up, because I think it's past that point of cultural. It's not new anymore. It's past the point of cultural relevance. It's got to the stage where you can be nostalgic about it, but watching it for the first time in ages, all the effects held up for me. There was still a sense of freshness about it, even though it's kind of similar to countless movies made at the time. There's still a freshness. It's still head and shoulders over a lot of these films. So, but it's still kind of, it's not as smart as it wants to be, and that kind of knocks a couple of points off for me. So it's 8 for me.
Fair enough. I see. For me, really, it's a 7. But then I watched it again, and I think I'm gonna be positive about it and give it an 8, because I think, despite the problems I have with it, it is a very entertaining piece of work, and it is iconic. For all the reasons that I probably didn't like it when I first saw it, it is definitely an iconic movie. It's one of those things that will stand the test of time.
It's difficult. Yeah. It's difficult getting Mark Gatiss from Spaced out of your head when you watch the bad guys in it. That's or Kevin Eldon and Mark Gatiss.
Yeah. Anyway, Simon, a score from you.
Yeah, I mean, at the time of what it did within cinema, I think it's up there with Toy Story in some respects. But Toy Story has a really, really great script that will keep it, timeless. And this hasn't got a really great script, although it does hold up on so many levels. That I think is still really entertaining. And I watched it with my nephew and daughter a few weeks back, and they both really enjoyed it. So it does hold up, and they certainly didn't talk like it was dated or anything like that. So it's not perfect, so it's a 9 for me.
Fine. 2 9s and 2 8s. Right, we will be back shortly after Christmas to hopefully, as long as it does turn up, I'm assuming it will. It's so close now that the reviews have started to come out, so it's definitely going to get some kind of a release. We'll be back to talk about The Matrix Resurrections after Christmas. Until then, I was JR.
I was Matt.
I was Simon.
I was Mark.
Thank you for coming along, Mark, and we will speak again soon.